Welcome to the Commercial Real Estate Podcast with your host, the Mindful Investor.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Commercial Real Estate Podcast with your host, the Mindful Investor. I'm really glad you are here. Today we have a great guest, Gayland Panko. His journey is quite impressive. He acquired 7.8 million worth of real estate within his first year of investing. He walks the walk. He has a lot of experience with different sectors, and with him we will cover a lot of ground. I wanted this first episode to be broad. We will talk about financing for Canadians investing in the US. We will talk about syndication and carried interest. We will talk about due diligence and estoppels. We will talk about the importance of leases when dealing with commercial real estate tenants and what triple net leases are. We will talk about 4 types of commercial real estate: plazas, multifamily, parking lot, and medical building. We will talk about cap rates versus cost of borrowing. We will talk about vendor takebacks, and we will hear his interesting insights about mentorship. Thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the episode as much as I did. Hey, so welcome, Gayland, and thank you for being part of the show today. How are you doing?
Good, Orlin. Thanks for having me.
I will be asking you a few questions. The first one is, what were you doing before real estate investing?
Right before real estate investing, I was a cattle rancher. Previous to that, I was a cattle buyer for a livestock ordering company. And 2004, we bought a cattle ranch, which, technically is real estate investing. But yeah, we did that from 2004 right up till 2014.
And what do you do now?
Well, now I am a commercial and farm and ranch realtor. I just got licensed here last fall, and but I would say my main job is a real estate investor. So I'm a full-time investor and syndicator in all types of commercial properties, investment properties.
Okay, nice. What got you into real estate?
Well, during those ranching years, it was really disheartening. We were losing money, and it was frustrating. So I put my ranch for sale, and there was just no interest whatsoever in a cattle ranch in Western Canada in those times. But that was exact same time that the U.S. financial crisis happened in 2008 and 9. And so I started looking and researching, and I thought, wow, what an opportunity it is down there. So I started planning, and I started reading books, and I thought, well, if I ever sell this cattle ranch, I want to invest in real estate.
And when you say Western Canada, where do you mean?
My ranch is in Saskatchewan, so southwest of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan.
Okay, and in terms of your real estate portfolio, and you say you do syndication, so I'm sure you started with your own money first. Can you walk us through the main stages of your real estate portfolio growth?
I guess 2011, 2012 is when I first started investing, and that was in Atlanta, Georgia. I'd bought a couple single-family homes, and all cash. There was no way to get financing, especially for a Canadian in those days. And so that was our first investments. Then from there, I bought a 12-unit apartment building. I believe the next purchase was an 18-unit apartment building. Then I bought a 4-plex. Then we bought a commercial retail strip mall and a parking lot, all in the same year. That was all in 2014. And that was the year that I sold the cattle ranch. So I'd been planning this for like 4 or 5 years. So we hit the ground running as soon as I had cash. And we got it all spent within 12 months. And then that's when I started getting creative. I started bringing in some partners, doing, just really small type syndications with just one other partner or 2 other partners. And then after that, and then in the following years, when I would refinance and pull equity out of properties, I would use that and redeploy it and buy another property. So then I started getting into medical office, some more retail, and eventually into the U.S.
And what did you buy in the U.S.?
Our first one was in 2018. We bought a 10-unit strip mall in Lakeland, Florida. And then we bought a single tenant retail in Kissimmee, Florida. And then we bought a medical office complex. And right now we sold the single tenant, and now we're actually looking, we're shopping again right now. So with the coronavirus and everything, we're just sitting there with a lot of capital ready to deploy, and we're just waiting to see where the best deal is going to be.
What was your single tenant?
Oh, it was a pawn shop in Kissimmee, Florida. A great location. And actually they had about 14 different buildings in Florida, and I think they had 20 or 21 in Puerto Rico. So they were a large organization, really well looked after property, but we had a lot of trouble financing it. Partly because we were Canadian, partly because it was a single tenant, and partly because they were a pawn shop. And pawn shop's just not a favorable tenant for lenders.
But you had a good experience with it?
I did, actually. It was actually a really interesting, creative deal. At first, the lender said, "Yep, we're good to go, Gayland," and I'd worked with him twice previous, so he said, "Yeah, we're probably good to go at about 70% loan to value." And then he got in a motorcycle accident, and he disappeared, and so I got shuffled to a younger guy at the bank, and about 3 or 4 days before I was supposed to remove conditions, they pulled out, and they said, "We won't do this. We might do it at 55% loan to value." And I was shocked. I'm like, "Well, what are we going to do now?" I said, "What's the problem?" I said, "There wasn't a problem before." They said, "Well, the lease is coming due right away." And I said, "Well, okay, let me work on this." So I actually called the corporate headquarters for the pawn shop, and I negotiated a 10-year lease with the condition if I closed on the property. So we got my lawyer to do this stuff up all really fast. They signed off on it. I signed off on it, and took it back to the bank and said, "Here, I've got a 10-year lease now." And then they said, "Oh, okay, well, we'll run it up the chain." And they ran it up the chain and said, "No, we still can't go higher than 55% loan to value." So I said, "Well, how can we make this work?" And they said, "Well, unless you have more cash, there's nothing we can do." And I said, "Well, what if I get the owner to hold a second mortgage for the balance that we're short?" And they said, "Oh yeah, that's great if you can do it." So then I went to the seller and asked them, and it took a little bit of twisting and squirming and begging on my part, but then they agreed to hold about 15% in a second position for 1 year at a relatively high rate of interest. But that wasn't that important to us, because we were told that when my original lender came back from the hospital, he was going to kind of straighten this stuff all out once we'd done some repairs to the property. So yeah, we closed just barely. We repaved the sidewalk. We got a bunch of different inspections done. There was some issues with the roof. We got that fixed. And that was in July of 2019. In December, we ended up selling the property. And we made 70% return on investment when we sold it.
Can you walk us through this 70%?
Yeah, so we bought the property for $875,000, of which we only had about 25% down on the property. And then, of course, we levered the rest with 55% from the first lender and 15 or 16% from the second lender, the second mortgage. So then when we sold it for $1,090,000, all that extra that we made, based on what we actually put into the property to start with, it was 70% return on investment.
Oh, wow. And just by doing some cosmetic renovations to it?
Yeah, really, it was, we were lucky. The timing was right. The guy that ended up buying it was actually in second position behind us when we originally bought it. And it was a larger hedge fund. And we knew the value was there. He knew the value was there. And originally, there really was only about a year left on the lease. And now we turned that into a 10-year lease with a brand new shiny parking lot. And, we tweaked the lease a little bit, and yeah, they liked it, they loved it, and so they bought it. So it was actually easier to sell it than it was to refinance.
So we see the importance of leases when dealing with commercial real estate. You mentioned earlier that you had a parking lot. Can you tell us about that deal?
Yeah, the parking lot's not a real big money maker, and I ended up renting the rest of the spots. There's about 13 other parking spots that I rent out monthly, and it's been pretty good.
What's the return on a parking lot?
This one was probably about a 7% cap rate. Not real great, but it was more of a strategic purchase. I was just buying it to protect our tenants, so we would have a spot to take our trash out.
I see. For commercial real estate, how do you find the good property management? What are your criteria?
Yeah, it was a lot of trial and error. We found some really bad ones, and usually it's easy to notice when you have a bad one because things just aren't working. You're not making money, tenants are mad, you can't get your reports. So it's really easy to identify. But you have to act quick, and then you've got to try another. And really that's the secret. You cannot be married to it. Anyone who's been in the game for a long time, no one's ever just had one property manager and been happy, I don't think, unless they got extremely lucky. So what I try and do now, if I'm in a new market, I'll phone as many realtors as I can and ask, kind of goofy questions like, if you had a property manager to manage your grandmother's house, who would you pick in town? And if a few of those guys agree on a certain individual, well, that's probably the guy I'm going to call. That's what I did in Lakeland, Florida, and it worked out pretty well.
And how much do they charge there, and what type of property do they manage for you?
We're basically about 5%, and that's almost a North American standard, I would say, with commercial property. And it's almost the same with multifamily. It's generally in the US, it's 5%. If you get into single family homes, it can be 8, 10, or even 12%.
You talk about cap rate. Can you explain for those who don't know what that is, what it is, and what type of cap rates you're looking for when you invest?
Sure. Well, a cap rate is essentially just the yield on your return. If you paid all cash for a property and say you paid $100,000 and it returned you $7,000 on your investment, that would be a 7 cap. Now, in real estate, we kind of use it to level the playing field. So it's a really high quality A-class building in a large urban center might only be a 4.5 cap rate, because that cap rate should be low because there's no perceived risk. Now, the higher the perceived risk, the cap rate's going to be higher because investors want to be rewarded for taking that risk. If I'm going to buy in the projects in Detroit and there's drive-by shootings and gang violence every night, I'm probably going to want a little higher return on my investment because it's pretty scary. The house could get burnt down. The tenant profile is tougher. So generally, as you get into the sketchier areas or the more risky areas, the cap rate's going to be higher. Same with small towns in Saskatchewan. 10% cap rate is kind of a norm in small towns, because these small towns, if they lose their largest employer, a lot of people move out, and you'll have a tough time renting your property. It's kind of a metric, and I generally try and choose a cap rate at least 3% higher than what my cost of funds is. So if I'm borrowing money at 4%, I want to make sure I'm investing it at a 7% cap rate or better.
And how do you factor in if interest rates go up?
Cap rates have to go up. They sometimes they don't, and the same thing happens, Ori, when interest rates go down. Cap rates should come down, and we've seen that, right, all through I would say 2008, 9, all the way to 2016, 17. Cap rates got smaller and smaller and smaller as the cost of funds got cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And mind you, we can't really go a whole lot lower. So that's something that all us investors have to keep in mind. Cap rates can't continue to go down. There is a zero. So, they can only get compressed so far. And if your cap rate is lower than your cost of funds, what are you doing? There's no point. You shouldn't borrow money. Because why on earth would you borrow money at 3.2% if your return is only 3%? you're throwing money away. And what we're trying to do is the exact opposite. We're trying to use the bank's money, and I'll pay 5% for someone else's money if I can put it to work and make 8 or 9%. Then essentially I'm making the spread out of someone else's money. So that's the whole idea with cap rates and relating to interest rate.
Okay, thank you. So you were quite creative with that one project where you had to negotiate a second mortgage with the vendor. Do you have other examples of deals where you had to be creative to get it to close in commercial real estate?
Yeah, I've got a lot of them, and most of them I just thank my lucky stars they worked, because a lot of times they could backfire as well. There was a 24 unit building we had under contract here in Saskatchewan. This would have been in late 2015, early 2016. We were short about $100,000 to close on the property, and time was running out to remove conditions, and I had no ideas. I'd exhausted every idea, so I thought, well, I may as well ask the seller. It can't hurt. The worst thing he can say is no, and he won't sell the property. So yeah, we went to him and asked him to hold I think it was 100 or maybe 110,000 for 1 year at 7%, because I knew I was refinancing another property in about 2 months, but I couldn't make the timeline work. You know what I mean? I knew the money was coming, but it was just a little too far past our window. I mentioned to the real estate broker, and he mentioned it to the seller, and then they did kind of a deep dive on me as a person. So they had inquired about anyone who'd ever worked with me, property managers, other people. They tried to find out any dirt on me to see if I was a stand-up guy. And it was kind of a compliment. Del Peters was the realtor in Saskatchewan, and he said, he goes, every single person I asked, I could not find someone to said a bad thing about you, Gayland. So I told the seller that. And so yeah, I guess that was what convinced him. So yeah, he held financing for me. At the end of the year, I remember distinctly, he called me and he sounded worried, like he didn't think he was going to get paid back. And I said, oh yeah, the money's all here, and paid him back, and everything was great.
Do you have any recommendations in terms of how to be creative and but more importantly, how to negotiate? Do you have any tips?
I think the biggest thing is just, you have to keep your cool. You can't lose your head when you're dealing with people across the table from you, because a lot of people in this business have a big ego, but not a lot of, and try and find out what they want. We all assume that it's always price, but a lot of times it's not. A lot of times it's terms or conditions. It might be a timeline. So like, it's really important to talk to them and ask the questions, because sometimes it's not just about getting the highest price or the lowest price.
Do you have example of what questions one could ask to figure these conditions or these terms out?
I just like to give them a variety of questions, and sometimes you don't even say it. Sometimes it's in your offer. I like to offer some just different things just to see what they counter with. I'll ask for some chattels. Say my goal is to get a lower price. Well, I'll ask for the apartment owner's Cadillac. And he says, well, no, I won't give you the Cadillac. Say, oh, okay, well, if you won't give me the Cadillac, how about we drop $20,000 off the price? And I never wanted the Cadillac in the first place. So it's really important to do a lot of communicating with them.
You mentioned financing in the US being difficult initially. Has it gotten easier with time? And if so, how?
It's gotten easier for us just because we're using the same bank. But it was not easy. I had a guy that I sort of considered a mentor, and he had told me that financing in the U.S. was really easy if it was commercial property, because they'll just qualify the building and not the person. I thought, well, that's the same as Canada, so yeah, it stands to reason. So I went into it with this idea that financing commercial property in the U.S. was really easy, and we put a huge office building. It's like 38,000 square feet in Atlanta, Georgia, under contract, and went through all the due diligence, had my team all ready. And I went to, I think, 7 different commercial mortgage brokers, and I struck out with every single one of them. And this was over the course of 2 months. We dragged this thing out. We ended up dropping the deal, and I phoned back this mentor of mine and said, like, how did you get financing? What did you do differently that we didn't do? And that's when he said, oh, well, no, it was owner financing. The owner just financed us. And I'm like, oh, come on, man. you would have saved me a lot of effort. But at the same time, I eventually did get financing with a local bank in Florida. We'd knocked on, I think, 25 doors, and it was the only bank that would lend to Canadians because they have no recourse. So, I can give personal guarantees all I want, but a U.S. bank, if everything goes south, they can't come across the line and get money back out of me. So that's a huge red flag. And for most of their policies, they just say, unless you have a U.S. resident or citizen who's willing to sign on this thing, they did not want to deal with us for commercial real estate. And so I finally found this, it was like a really old family-owned bank in Florida. Yeah, now I've got a great relationship with them. I go down, have drinks, go for supper with them. That's kind of who we use now. And I'm thinking after a couple years of filing U.S. tax returns, maybe it'll be different. Maybe then we'll have a little bit of a tax history in the U.S., but it doesn't sound like it. It sounds like without a U.S. resident, most of their policy has just been, we'll just lend to Americans.
You talked about asset protection. So how do you protect your assets in the US?
So the first time we went down in 2011, I was just a Canadian corporation. So I bought with a Canadian corporation, and then I just bought liability insurance on the properties. By the time we re-upped our syndication in 2018, a lot of the laws had changed. Some of the tax laws had changed. This is a moving target, so don't hold me to this. This could change at any time. But what we ended up doing was a limited partnership with a LPGP. So the general partner, which is myself, is the only one with any liability, and the limited partners are responsible for the investment. So all the investment money goes in via the limited partners. And then the GP has 0.02% of the limited partnership. And I hold all the liability. So if I get sued, they sue my Florida corporation, which has, a couple bucks in it. And that's how we protect ourselves. And the limited partners, they're limited. Their liability is limited to the amount they invest. That's it. They can't lose any more than that.
So you mentioned syndication. Can you tell us about the structure you use and who does what?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and a lot of novice investors, they want to syndicate right off the bat. And I want to stress this. It is not for a beginner. You have to use your own money first. You have to get experience. You have to see some of the pitfalls and challenges. All these partnerships are great when everyone's making money, but when you go through a rough patch, it will eat people up, and these partnerships will go bad in a hurry. I've been incredibly lucky. None of my partners have ever lost a dime. We've only ever made money, but I'm very selective about who I choose to partner with as well. I like to keep my syndications really small with either 2 or 3 partners, and I always invest myself as well, just to try and show that, I'm willing to put my money at risk, not just risk other people's money. So basically what we'll do is, it's called a 20 and 2, and I kind of copy this from private equity firms. So the GP, which is myself, the sponsor who creates the deal, finds the deal and packages everything up and brings in investors. I need to be paid for what I've done. So my payment is called carried interest, and it's 20%, and that's on the back end. So after everyone's been repaid their initial capital, then I'm entitled to 20% of the profits after that point. And the rest of the limited partners get the other 80%, of which I'm a limited partner as well. And then there's the 2 refers to the management fee. So also because I'm asset managing, dealing with the property managers, dealing with releasing, refinancing, all of that, then it's 2% payment. And that's just an annual payment. Basically it pays for, keeping the lights on, doing the bookwork, putting out reports.
How do you select your LPs, your limited partners?
When it started out, it was basically if it was someone came to me, I would try and make a deal with them. Now, it really has to be a special case. It's almost like where I find something that I can't afford to do it all myself, then I'll make a couple calls to people who have, that I like, who have been interested in the past, or that I've worked with in the past. Like some of them are your best customers, guys that have already made money, and you're like, well, do you want to try investing in Florida now? And they're like, oh, sure, why not? Yeah, there's really no rhyme or reason. I don't advertise it. It's honestly, it's become such a full-time job that I really don't want to get a whole lot bigger, because it takes too much time away from other things. There's a lot of management involved in keeping all these balls in the air. So I'm looking to simplify things. And actually, like my long-term goal would be to get right out of syndication and just have my own personal, property portfolio, and just live off the income, spend the days traveling and playing with my family.
What do you like about commercial real estate, and why commercial real estate now versus single families like you had in the beginning?
I just didn't have the patience to keep buying single family homes when there was some really good apartment deals. So then I went into apartments, and everything about apartments, what's not to love? It's a segment that people always need. The cap rates were fairly reasonable. It just seemed like it ticked all the boxes. Not a lot of risk, really good return. It's always going to be a useful piece of real estate. But in Saskatchewan, we got absolutely crippled in 2015, 16, 17, basically right up till this year. Our vacancy rates in some towns in Saskatchewan went to 50%. So we got scratched up horrible. I had one property in particular. I had to feed about $5,000 or $6,000 a month just out of my pocket just to pay the mortgage. And you can't do that very long, like 1 year of that's $70,000. It was killing me. So that's where I started looking at how am I going to get yield on this other money, and I started investing in retail properties. On medical office, the cap rates were higher. I didn't have any vacancy issues. The problem is when you do have a vacancy issue, it can be a big one, right? So you may lose a big business tenant, and it's a big vacancy all at once. But for the most part, with triple net leases, what they signed on the lease, that's what I filed with CRA. They paid the bills. There was no unforeseen maintenance. That's one of the things that you'll notice in apartment buildings. You'll underwrite it, and you're doing your analysis, and you think, oh well, maybe $600 or $700 a unit for maintenance and repairs. And at the end of the year, you go through what the actuals were, and you're like, wow, this is $1,400. How did this happen? I don't remember doing a bunch of renovations, but it's just one of those things that it's really easy to underestimate it. And with a triple net commercial tenant, it's triple net. They pay the rent. If there's any work to be done, that's charged back to them. So what you get is what you get. And that's the big difference.
Can you expand a bit about the triple net? So what are those three elements they pay for?
Yeah. So like an apartment building is a gross lease. So they pay you a gross amount, but the owner, the landlord, is responsible for all the expenses. So I pay for the building power, the water, the sewer, the taxes, insurance, maintenance, you name it, everything. With a triple net lease, the tenant agrees and they sign that they pay for every cost associated with that building. So they'll pay a rent, and then I might collect and pay, say, the utilities and the insurance and the property taxes, but I bill that tenant for them for their proportionate share. So if there's two tenants and they each occupy 50% of the building, they're going to pay 50% of my insurance, the property taxes, any common area maintenance. So really it's exactly what it sounds like. They do everything. They pay for everything. So it doesn't matter if taxes go up or utilities go up, you're still netting the same amount of money. Those costs are passed on to the tenants.
What's your favorite property you own?
I periodically, stress test them, because I want to pick off the ugly ducks that aren't really pulling their weight. And, they're all pretty well neck and neck. There's none that I would say I'm never going to sell. And there's none that I would say right now that I have to sell. I'll tell you a story. My best one turned into my worst one. So it was this 24 unit. This was a kind of a creative deal too. I bought it with an agreement for sale, which was the owner holding financing for, it was supposed to be a year. So I'd give rent increases. I increased the rent in all 24 units by about $150 a unit. When those rent increases took effect in 6 months, I refinanced with CMHC insurance and I got a new appraisal. So I'd bought this building for $2.4 million with the agreement for sale. When I got my appraisal, it appraised at $2.9 million. So CMHC financed it, and I actually took money out. I had zero of my own money in that deal. I had 85% loan to value on $2.9 million from CMHC, and I only put, I think, $400,000 down in the first place. So I ended up taking all of my money out. I had a 24 unit building that with none of my own money. So that was my favorite building. And I thought, this thing's a gold mine. I was making so much cash flow every month, but that was the one. It was in a transition area. And within 2 months, I went from 24 units filled to about 12 units filled. And then I had just problem after problem. And eventually I had to give it away. I guess I still made money on it, but probably not all things considered, because I put 2 new boilers in it. I put a new roof on it.
Let's be technical now. Can you take an example of a property, maybe the medical building in the US, and can you walk us through the due diligence process? How do you go about doing your due diligence, and are you good at it? And if so, what makes you good at it?
I am good at it, not because of anything in particular other than I make a list and I follow it. It's really that simple. You have to be organized and you have to be really thorough. The very first thing I always do with due diligence is talk to the lender, because lenders that's their job. Their job is due diligence, right? They're usually the ones lending more money to the property than you're putting into it. So they want to make sure that that it's got a proper survey. They want to make sure that it's got an appraisal that makes sense. They want to make sure there's no environmental concerns. So that's always my first place, is talk to the lender and say, what do you need to finance this? And they'll give a big list. An engineer's report might be on there. And so that's number one. Those are the first things. Fire and safety code, ADA compliance. These are all things that, I get from my lender and I check them off one by one. Because if you don't do those things, you're not going to get financing. So that's absolutely crucial. And sometimes you won't think of something, and a lender, it'll be on their list, and it'll kill the deal, and for good reason, right? It's if a bank won't lend on something, we probably shouldn't be investing in it. That's always been my philosophy. So that's always the first place. The next thing I do is review leases very thoroughly, because like on that medical building, we had a dentist, a pediatrician, a nurse practitioner, a roofing company, and they all have separate leases. Some of them were 15 years old. Some of them were just a year or two old. So you go through and make sure that everything looks legit. Then I talk to all the tenants. I like to go, and even if it's like that one retail strip mall in Florida, I had 10 different tenants. And I made a point. I went down there with my wife, and over 3 days, I would go and I would meet with every one of the tenants. And it works wonders with tenant relations when they can talk to the owner. And if they say, my back door is getting rusty, and I say, oh, okay, well, I'll make sure that we get that painted. Or there's a tree hanging over hitting the eaves trough or banging off the roof. And I say, well, we'll get that trimmed. But when you're doing due diligence, it's good because they'll complain to you. You say, I'm looking at buying this building. Are you having any problems with the property manager? Are you having any problems with the owner? Any other tenants? And I do the same with multifamily buildings. I try and talk to almost every tenant I can. And realtors hate that. They don't want you talking to tenants because tenants kill a lot of deals. But that's, if you're buying, you want to know the dirt, right? You want to know what all's wrong with it. So I always try and talk to the tenants, talk about their future plans. If they're happy here, do they have enough space? Are they looking for more space? You can kind of get an idea that, geez, this guy might outgrow this space. He might be moving out here. His lease is coming due. So I pay a lot of attention to the leases. The building inspection, I wouldn't say that's my strong suit. So I hire the best guy I can find and say, go through it, tell me every little thing that's wrong with it. And, is this building, is it built quality? Is it gonna survive? After that, I go through maintenance contracts, see if there's any deferred maintenance with the properties. Like some of them will have, they'll have a contract for HVAC services, the furnaces and air conditioning units. Maybe they change the anode rods and the water heaters. Try and get an idea of all that, and confirm who's responsible. And then, of course, financial review. That's another one of my strong suits is reviewing the financials. So the balance sheet and the income statement, and just make sure that the seller's books jive with what he's telling you and what's advertised. Because sometimes they'll say, oh, well, this is our income and this is our expenses. Well, you look at what they file either with the IRS or with Revenue Canada, and pretty soon you can tell if their expenses were way more than what they quoted. You can start asking questions and see if they can explain it, or if they were literally just trying to lie. And then the very last thing is estoppels. And estoppels, they're a must. So an estoppel, for those who don't know, and I didn't know, I did my first couple deals not even knowing what an estoppel was. It's basically, it's a signed letter by the tenant saying that, yes, I pay this much rent to the landlord. So I had bought a property in Saskatchewan, didn't have estoppels. I didn't know I needed them at the time. And the seller and the realtor knew that these numbers were made up. So they gave me leases that in one case, it was for a sign company, but they'd had an amendment to the lease and dropped the rate, and they never showed me this amended rate. So here I was thinking I was getting paid $12,000 a year on a sign lease when they had dropped it to $7,000, but they never showed me this amendment to the lease. So if I would have done an estoppel with the tenant, he would have said, well, no, I don't pay $12,000. There's this amendment. I only pay $7,000. And that's a way to cross-reference that what the seller's telling you is actually, in fact, true.
Do you use estoppels also with the residential tenants or just with commercial?
No, just with commercial. Residential, the tenants are quite a bit easier replaceable. And I think it's just logistically, there can be too many of them.
And how do you select a market?
Well, that's sometimes trial and error. The most important thing is research, and then drive that market. Go down, hop on a plane and walk it, and use the restaurants and talk to the shop owners. If you can go to the Chamber of Commerce, anyone you can talk to. Sometimes you can cross one off the list just by calling some of the realtors. You'll get an idea if they can be kind of down in the dumps and kind of mentioning that, their market's not that great. Well, then, right? But I always start with I'm on the computer constantly. And I pick a market that I like. Obviously one with population growth, job growth. And sometimes you just luck into it. Lakeland, Florida, I just happened to be driving down. I took a wrong turn and I went down South Florida Avenue, and every national tenant in the United States was on this one particular street. And I'm just like, wow, I didn't even know this town existed. And I stopped at a Dick's Sporting Goods, I guess. And I was talking to the guy behind the till, and I said, like, how many people are here? He said, oh, well, about 100,000. He said, but there's 10 million people within a 100-mile radius. And my eyes went, what? I couldn't believe it, right? Because Tampa was on one side, Orlando was on the other side. And then he told me that, this was the home of the Detroit Tigers spring training. He just went on a roll telling me all about it. And I'm like, wow, this place has to be on my radar. And so that's when I started looking around, and I really zeroed in on it. And I think it was last year, it was Realtor.com's #1 residential housing market in the United States.
Did you have a mentor or an accountability partner along the way?
I never had an official one. It was more or less, I would see someone doing something that I wanted to do, and I would just call them up and just start asking them questions. And I don't think there was ever a time when you call up a total stranger who's excellent at something or expert and say, I'm not that good at that. Would you mind giving me some tips and tricks? They always do. They always take the time. Even some of these guys are extremely busy. The one guy is from Austin, Texas. And I called him. He set aside time to talk to me. He owns, I don't know how many. He's one of the largest Keller Williams owners in the United States. And he had all the time in the world to help me out and discuss, buying real estate brokerages and my investments and, my triple net investments in Florida. And, I wouldn't say stick with one, because you could get a dud. And that's kind of what I found. I found a lot of these guys, they talk a big game, but then when sometimes you start asking questions and they don't have an answer, but they won't say they don't know, they'll just make something up. And that's worse. It's a lot better if you'll have someone that says, honestly, I don't know. But I know someone who might, and then they'll pass you off that way. It's good to keep learning and going in different directions, because, if you just stick with that one mentor, you're never going to get better than that person. So I find, if you keep increasing your goals, set them higher, follow a smarter guy. And, if you get as smart as him, then pick a smarter guy and keep going that way.
So basically you can outgrow your mentors and try to keep finding people who can help you along the way. And it doesn't have to be an official mentor. It can be somebody who is good at doing something. So you ask them for a bit of advice, a bit of that time. If you had to start over knowing what you do now, how would you go about it?
I would just start as early as I possibly could. And really, I try and simplify things. I try not to complicate them. So there's three guidelines that I'm sure these will be my three guidelines when I'm 99 years old. It's got to be a good location. The property I'm looking for has to be a great location. It has to be for less than replacement cost, which nowadays where I invest, that always seems to be reasonable, pretty easy to do, because it's always cheaper to buy something used than it is to build new, almost. Now that's not going to be the case if you're buying in some really affluent neighborhoods in downtown cores. But usually where I'm picking away at the suburbs of these mid-tier cities, buying under replacement cost is just an easy general rule. And the other one, and I think this one's the most important, is try and buy with, whether it's residential tenants or commercial tenants, with under market rents. If say your retail tenants, the average cost is $20 a foot, you don't want to buy a building filled with every tenant paying $20 a foot or $21 a foot. You want to buy it where everyone's paying $14 or $15 a foot, and maybe the odd guy is paying 19 or 20. That gives you room to increase rents, and it's affordable for the tenants. So same with apartment buildings. And kind of the way I've done it is just, save. Don't spend any money except on your investments, and refinance and then reinvest. And just be cautious, be careful.
What are your goals moving forward?
Maybe a little different than most people. I kind of want to simplify it. I've got these number goals, and I'm sure we all do. And I keep raising them as I hit them. And that's kind of just a way of keeping score and keeping me motivated. But I think my biggest goal would be just to set everything on cruise control, because they call this a passive investment, but it's not passive. It's a lot of work. So I would like to, maybe eventually throttle back my syndications and maybe close them up, sell them off, just pay everyone out all their money and say, find someone else to invest with, and then just really lock my stuff up in really tight, really safe, secure 100, 200 year real estate, and travel, spend time with my kids and my wife.
So we are having this interview during COVID. What are your thoughts around COVID and the future of real estate?
It doesn't look good. I would anticipate probably 30% of the restaurants won't open again. So that's a lot of empty brick and mortar. And honestly, I don't know, Uri, how that's going to shake out. I'm not sure if we're going to have enough ambitious people and small business entrepreneurs to take these spots and do something. It'll take a while. We're not going to refill them up if these small businesses, and not just restaurants. There's we had an automotive shop just announced they were pulling the plug. Some gyms, like fitness centers, some of them won't make it through. A lot of businesses are affected by this, and we were so on edge to start with that you lose a month or two of revenue, and it's almost impossible to come back from. So yeah, I'm anticipating apartments will be strong, really strong. Retail is going to be under a ton of pressure. Industrial space, I feel like is already been under pressure with the drop in oil in Western Canada. We've just when oil's booming, it's all good in Western Canada. Everyone wants a shop for their trucks and their water tanks and their welding trucks. With the crash in oil, that's a serious problem for us as well. So industrial is going to be under pressure. Retail, office space, like here we are. We're doing an interview on Zoom. Everyone's working from home. I think the writing's on the wall. Offices are not quite as necessary as they used to be. So I assume that trend is going to continue with less demand for offices. I think a multifamily apartments are a pretty safe bet for the future. If I had to invest in anything right now, I would say farmland and apartment buildings.
Okay, well, that was a great interview. Thank you so much for your time, Gayland.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ori. It was a pleasure. It's always fun talking with you.
Thank you.
Okay, take care, pal.
This has been the Commercial Real Estate Podcast with your host, The Mindful Investor. Thank you for tuning in, and for more information, visit themindfulinvestor.net.